Good evening, everyone. We are back again for another month of the Minotaur Book Club. Our focus, of course, for the Minotaur, well, not of course, but I'll share for anybody who is watching this video or is catching up with us, joining us for the first time. The Minotaur is a symbolism of what happens when we take the gifts of the gods and use it for personal gain. And so there's a whole story behind it. If you want to go back and take a look at all the historical, is it already, is it Greek literature? That was a Greek tale, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the Legend of King Minos.
Yep, the Legend of King Minos. And so he took something that was contributed by the gods, took credit for it, um, and tried to use it for personal gain. And so we are going back and looking at a lot of the founding documents, a lot of the things that were happening around the foundation of the United States and establishment of our Constitution, getting into the feel for where the founding fathers may have gotten some of their ideas from. We've covered so far looking at some of the Native American traditions that led into this, in particular the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois culture in the northeastern side, portion of the United States. We looked at the Federalist Papers for a couple things there. We looked at Common Sense by Thomas Paine in the last time, and we looked at the Anti-Federalists. And now we're looking at pirates. Arr.
Yeah.
So had to do it at one point at least. We can leave that behind us now. But yeah, this wonderful book that I sort of discovered that really got into the history of how it all puts together and gave us some backgrounds as far as what was really happening at that time and what may have been some portions that influenced the way that people were thinking about things. But nothing is as simple, and black and white. There's all kinds of shades of gray in here. And so I think we'll dive into that tonight. What parts of pirate culture were good, what parts of pirate culture were bad, because they certainly were both. And so let's go ahead and dive into it. Yeah, I was curious if we wanted to just go around first and get everybody's kinds of initial thoughts, maybe just like a 1 minute kind of reflection on your first reactions to the book, and then we can dive in to the individual pieces in the slides here. And I might take some notes as we go along and get into some points, and we can talk about some of the details of the different chapters brought about. So, sound like a good idea?
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Philippa, do you mind kicking us off?
All right, I'm happy to. I am so glad that somebody recommended this book. I thought it was terrific. And it particularly inspired me to go back and read the Hazlitt Basic Economics and even my McConnell Economics textbook. I just thought it was so well done. And I thought that I loved learning different things about pirate life. Fascinating.
Thank you. Laura, you can certainly go next if you're off mute, and then maybe Carter, if you're available, you can go after that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit mobile now. That's why I have my camera off. I actually have to admit I'm still working my way a little bit through this book. I'm probably only about 2 chapters off, I believe. I'm loving it. I think it is just a fascinating view into obviously pirate life. But I'm really appreciating about the book is this, what I find kind of entertaining about it is their single-minded focus that everything they are doing is strictly for plunder. It doesn't matter if they're raising the Jolly Rancher flag, was it the Jolly Roger flag, to actually fight, or if they're disguising themselves, or if they're, they don't want to go into a port or get their ship damaged because that takes them out of their actual single-minded focus. So I'm finding that kind of entertaining, and I'm liking the use of the word piratic. I've never heard that before. And I love it.
Radical.
Radical.
Yeah, that word was used quite a lot, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do like this idea, though, of alternatively raising the Jolly Rancher.
Let me get this straight. We have 100.
All right, Carter, if you're there and you want to chime in, otherwise we'll head on over to Brandon. There you go. Welcome, Carter.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So I guess when money is thrown into the picture here, there are really two kinds of people. I think walking through this country, through society, there are people who cannot bring themselves to admit that evil exists in any serious way, and then there are the people who see evil clearly in daily life, in our workplaces, especially when money is dangling right in front of us. So the first group, the ones that cannot admit that evil exists in any serious way, hides behind soft language and private self-comfort, out of self-interest, of course. And then they say everything will work out. They repeat phrases about God or goodness, as if words alone will repair what is obviously broken. Right? They will say that we should just trust the system, even when the system was built to exclude. Right? And then there are those that see evil but do not participate in the evil, but just expose, stops, and even reports it. And I think that's a very useful type of citizenship, a person that's useful inside our society.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to definitely make sure that we come back around to that and we get to this last topic about self-interest versus moral values. And I'm sure it'll pop up in a few other different places, but thank you, Carter. All right, Brandon, you're up next.
I would say overall the book was a little different than I was expecting. I'm not sure exactly what I expected, maybe more on the I guess the democratic part of it versus the economics, but it was really interesting. I've never really learned about pirates other than in movies. So I'm really glad I read this book, learned about the history of pirates. I definitely felt like there are things about the book where I felt like the word balance came to mind a couple times with respect to how extreme pirates would treat their captives versus when needed, versus how they wanted to treat each other to minimize the risk on the ship. It definitely seemed like maybe by becoming a pirate you're already assuming so much risk, you try to have to minimize it on the ship, right? So that was very interesting. I thought it was also, and this last thing, I thought it was interesting how at the very end of the book, I think at the end of the last chapter, the author talked about how, at least how I interpreted it, if I remember reading it correctly, he was talking about how greed is good and it leads to so many good things in our world and in our lives. But then, a lot of the book is how pirates cannot be too greedy amongst themselves or else things go awry and chaos is caused. So I feel like between greed and the treatment among those close to them that are needed for their own self-interest, and then the treatment of those that are plundering, a balance. There's got to be a balance. I don't know. Balance is important. So, but I'm really glad I read the book.
Nice. My sort of general thoughts in going through, I read this a while back, and so I recommended it here because I really wanted to talk about it with other people. And going back through and sort of reminding myself on different parts of it, I just remember that the economics and the nature that when there isn't a centralized authority, that you tend to develop a very different way of thinking and a very different way of system. The that can lead to, just something completely different. It's not what we thought of for pirates. And so this sort of secret life of the thing that happened behind it was fascinating. And I've gotten into watching, some other people were saying, like, different movies or TV series, but there's certain TV series that were kind of based off of the real stories. And I find a bunch of those fascinating, including this wackadoodle TV series called Our Flag is Death, which I think is on HBO. And if you go check it out, it's super funny, but it's actually almost entirely based on real true stories. There was a dandy pirate from every indication of it, probably was somebody who was LGBTQIA, who just Blackbeard fell in love with and adored and became part of his crew. So you had the most feared person in the world that everybody was afraid of, paired up with this guy, I think his name was Gentleman Jack, and just like it just brought together. It was, just like the whole. It's just fascinating, the real life stories that lead into all of these things. So I always find more crazy things inside the pirate world and pirate culture that blows my mind sometimes. All right, Arnie, what's your 1 minute summary there?
Let me provide a little historical background. But start with the present first. Peter Leeson is a professor at the McCurder School of Economics at George Mason University, which is the center for rational choice theory, which is a direct line from Adam Smith through Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, Ludwig van Mises, and Arthur Betz Laffer, that in answer to the question of what is real, their answer is there is only one thing that is real, the individual. And the nature of the individual is to be rational and self-interested. And the best of all possible worlds is to stand out of the way because progress is developed by letting those people loose. And any attempts to create justice, general welfare, or general well-being simply inhibits progress of the rational and self-interested. The founders were well aware of that. Madison in Federalist 10 and I think 54 or 55 said it differently, that we're born with natural rights, but we're born with different abilities and different ambitions. And in the preamble to the Constitution, they talked about preserving the general welfare, preserving justice, and taking care of posterity. The neoliberals throw that out. Hayek specifically says justice, the attempt to inject justice into the system only destroys the rationality of individual choice, producing the best of all possible worlds. So I think that Leeson provides a very good analysis of the pirate situation. But like Montesquieu and Plato and others have said, what applies in terms of governance or government for very small groups of people does not necessarily apply to larger and more complex situations like the United States. Different kind of governments or different kind of normative controls are necessary. And I think that there has been a movement since the 1950s to make the ideology, to make the idea of what is real of the neoliberals or the rational choice school of economics, the leading idea in the United States, back from when James Bernard says we should get rid of democracy because we need managers, up to when Russell Kirk said that the taxes were 92%, 60% of the American people lived perfectly good lives with housing and food and schools, but they thought they were standing in the way of progress, so that we needed to reduce the middle class in order to increase wealth. And so the invisible hook or the invisible hand has led to rising inequality, getting rid of the protections of government. Thatcher said it best, there is no such thing as society. Reagan came along and said the government is the problem. And Bill Clinton said the age of big government is over. All of this on the path to the 2025 report. The Heritage Foundation, founded by the Koch brothers and others, which produced the political agenda that's now being implemented in the United States. So, to sum it up, I think Pete said this a little. I'll say it a little different than he did, or maybe the same. Is that this philosophy of piracy seems to have become the basis of rational self-interest seems to become the leading idea in the world today, and maybe we are being led now by modern day pirates at the highest office in the land. Aside from that, I don't have any strong opinions.
Yeah, no strong opinions whatsoever. Yeah. It's kind of fun to talk to Arnie about some of these things, because he was a professor in sociology. Correct me if I get any of this wrong, Arnie. And you had a little crossover, like about a year or two, I think you said, with Peter Leeson over at George Mason.
No, I never met him, but when I was at Mason, I knew the head of the department very well. He was one of my best friends that was displaced while I was there by the rational choice theory with Buchanan, and founded by the Koch brothers and the large money that's behind the Tea Party movement, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, and other think tanks through which these ideas are funneled with money in politics into becoming legislative principles that are being passed by Congress, and created the situation where the checks and balances that the founders envisioned to save us from this kind of piracy have been rendered totally ineffective, as we see with the shutdown of government. Time for me to be quiet for a while.
So I think there was a good portion of this first section that kind of branched out of this. So this could be a good thing for us to sort of kick off for, like the next 10 minutes or so of the invisible hook versus the invisible hand, which I think really does come down to rational actor theory versus I put down Kahneman because that's sort of my best, sort of thing. Yeah, there's a couple other different factors in there, and I'll briefly define them just so make sure that we're all on the same page. And if I miss anything, then feel free, raise your hand or something, or chime in on it. But the rational actor theory was kind of in that line with like sort of the invisible hand, and it was an economic principle that kind of set up this idea of capitalism, which is that if the markets are open and free, then there is a rational process wherein if I want to make more sales, if I want to do, or have a better product, if I want to generate, some more money, there are certain things I will do and I won't do. And that if I'm trying to raise the price of my bread, then that's going to make bread more expensive for other people. That could affect things like the farmer that raises the wheat that I need to make the bread, or any of the other different, portions in here. And so the theory is that there will be a natural balance inside of there that would prevent any one of these things from getting out of balance with the others. And for many, many years, as Arnie was sort of, listing, that there was time after time after time that it was built into it was just the assumption of the land and how we generated policy inside of different governments, and became the foundation of a lot of the different rules it became kind of a de facto standard. Until Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize in economics for proving that the rational actor theory is wrong. And they were able to prove through their research and experiments that people will make decisions that are not rationally in their own best interest, but that are based off of emotional reactions that they're having, that are based off of pattern matching that they have in the system, and that you can actually thwart and warp the economic system through leveraging a lot of these pattern ideas to convince people that they want something that they don't want. And that has become the foundation of a lot of modern marketing processes that are happening, today, where the knowledge of this information is leading to imbalances in the marketplace that are crafted on purpose to get around the rationality which might create a natural checks and balance. And so those are the multiple forces that are kind of at play.
Can I throw in a quick example to bring that to life a little bit?
Sure.
Back in the 1960s, a psychologist at the University of Chicago was in bed reading. His wife came in and said, "We need a better light for you. Your eyes are dilated." And he said, "No, the light's perfect." And he figured out that his eyes were dilated, wide open, because he was happy with what he was reading. So the next day, he had his male graduate students come in, and he held up pictures of babies and bunnies and Playboy centerfolds. And the centerfolds, the guy's eyes popped. So he then sold a black box that measured the cathectic response to stimuli to Tiffany's. And married couples would come in, newlyweds, looking for flatware. And they said they wanted heavily embossed silverware. And they hooked them up to the machine, and it said what they really they wanted Danish flatware and the modern, and what they really wanted was the heavily embossed. So they trained the salespeople at Tiffany's to they stocked embossed, displayed Danish modern, and trained the staff on how to switch them. Peter Thiel at Peloton is now using that to collect data on all of us. And so they're sending out ads based on their knowledge of what our responses are, with subliminal little messages linked in that influence us to choose what they want. Or as the guy that started Apple said, my job is not to give them what they want; it's to give them what they need.
All right.
So it's happening.
I know I could say many more things on this, but I'm going to hold off because I want to make sure that other people get a chance. Anybody have any thoughts on this category? So, and it could even be, if you want to pull in some of the stuff from the early chapter of the book, the hook versus the hand, and the sort of the general economic theory.
If you're a senior citizen, do not
All right. Okay, we can move into some more topics. All right, the next topic that we got into in chapter 2 was looking at the start of sort of the democracy thing, and that there was this reaction to the way that the merchant ships kind of treated. So most of the people who were pirates had previously worked on ships under either merchants operating under charter from the Royal Navy, and then, or they had started working under what they called the buccaneers, which were ships that were hired by one of the empires, one of the royal families, to attack the ships of the royal family of another country, and make it too expensive to do things or capture their goods or any of a variety of different things. So let me switch it up this time. So does anybody have any thoughts that they want to put in first on this category? What grabbed you when it came to the sort of the birth of democracy on ships and sort of where it came from?
I don't think I have anything particularly intelligent, to say about it, other than I love the way the author explained. First of all, I never really understood why the captains on those old ships in the 17th century were so evil and mean, and why people tolerated it. So I love that he was able to demonstrate that it was the ownership structure that naturally would create a situation that would lead to some terrible cruelty to workers. But at the same time, that itself sort of challenges the whole idea that if you just let everything go and let the invisible hand work, that it'll eventually be good for most people, because that's a very good example of how individual need and greed has the complete opposite effect on most people. If you're the investor, it's probably okay. So I just love that that was laid out and explained. I just wish I knew somebody who wants me to explain it the way he did.
Like, I would like to explain this to more people in the world. Go for it, Carter.
Yeah, I think it's necessary again to see some of the same dangerous sides of human nature, right? I mean, these pirates, they saw what happens when one group can quietly control jobs, housing, courts, and voting without real oversight. They saw how people could smile in public while blocking others from opportunity in private. No, on these pirate ships, there were rules to divide treasure, right? Rules to compensate injured crew, and sometimes even rules that set different races on more equal footing, because everyone needed each other in battle, right? It was not morality; it was pure hard logic, right? They knew that if they let favoritism and abuse run wild, the ship would basically just explode from within. So, I think we can ask ourselves, I mean, if criminals at sea could figure out the need for written rules and shared power, what excuse do modern corporations and governments have when they refuse real fairness?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I might be saying something similar. Yeah, I mean, the way I saw this, and I think they touch on this some, is that the captains on the merchant ships are held accountable by another person, right? Someone who owns the ships and are not actually physically there on the ship. So they're answering to others. They're held accountable. They're accountable to others. They're feeling that pressure. Whereas on the pirate ships, they're only answering to themselves, right? They have to rely on the people that are physically there on the boat with them. Now, of course, on the merchant ships, you're relying on those others too, but you're answering to someone else who's not on the ship. So that seems to be a big difference too.
Yeah. Did you want to chime in, Laura?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yeah, I mean, I thought what was so interesting was sort of the checks and balances that they installed in terms of not only having the captain, but also having the quartermaster, right? And sort of how they created this sort of chain of command in some level to ensure that everybody was treated fairly, because you couldn't instill all that power into one individual. You had to have somebody else oversighting that individual who also had some of your interests. Not all the time, according to some of the stories, but typically was representing you on some level.
I thought it was interesting too that these guys were mostly illiterate, and they came up with a governance system that basically is the best that we have even today.
Yeah. One of the things I liked about the background, or the sort of what happened or what developed out of this is, I mean, it's just very telling, and it happens again and again and over again. I've read some other things about sort of the opinions of the people who were funding the boats back in the day. And they felt like, we are doing the biggest risk. I'm putting in, thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds into this venture to make this thing happen. And then you got the sailors who were like, yeah, and we're putting in our lives. And we see some of the stuff come up in really bad VC funding of like startups right now, where the VCs are like, I'm putting in all of this money up front. And then the owners of the business who take in that VC money are like, I'm doing all of this extra work. And then they have their employees sitting with them right next to them, doing all of this work to make this thing grow. And when it grows and when it does finally pay off, all of the profits go to the C staff and to the investors and not to the other people who worked alongside for the entire amount of time that it is. And the disproportionate payoff very quickly creates an inequity. And when the person who is in charge of deciding the equity is the person who gets the most equity, then surprise, surprise, they tend to give themselves a lot more value in what's happening in the system versus the other. And I think, and for me, that was like the big thing here is like the investors, it was all about the investors, and only the captain received some shares in the profits of the venture. So all the profit of the venture went to the investors and to the captain. And none of that went to the sailors. They were just hired on. And in order to create the balance, they ended up using force to keep the sailors in line and doing what they needed to do. And with the pirates, the different thing, like everybody shared equally, with some proportions based upon their role. If you're a strategist, you got more. But it wasn't like 300 times more. It wasn't even like 10 times more. It was mostly just 1.5 to 2 times more. So very equitable, along there. And as a result, they made different choices. And they used different systems, and they wanted to do these checks and balances and set up to make sure that nobody who had a position of power could use that power for their own personal gain in direct reaction to seeing what happened on the merchant ships. Like they saw that this did not work and this led to horrible things happening whenever that captain has too much power. So let's all be investors in this together. Let's all split the details together. Let's all make decisions together. Let's all figure this out. And they reinvented, you might say. I don't know how many of them were familiar with sort of a Greek democracy, but they kind of seemed like they had invented their own version of democracy, that wasn't. I didn't see a lot of resonance with sort of the Greek style of doing things. They had different outcomes or different aims, I think.
Hey, let me throw something in.
Yeah.
During World War II and after World War II, much of American innovation was driven by DARPA, which financed a lot of the research into Telstar and other new innovative technologies. They created the backbone for the internet, and increasingly, DARPA became defunded. Well, before that, Congress allocated the money to DARPA, and DARPA was empowered to take risky investments. 60%, they accepted a 60% failure rate, knowing that risky investments of 40% would give us some amazingly important innovation. So that a lot of the technology that was being developed on behalf of the American people by the representatives of the American people. Increasingly, we have moved away from that model, and now it's driven by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and investing much of their own money without any regulation, without oversight by Congress, and not representing the will of the American people. And we have no idea where they're taking us.
Gets into a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask, so Arnie, would you see that as a function of just the changing economics and the wage disparities? Like we were just sort of talking about, that probably since that time, the gap between the top echelon at an organization versus not is just greatly widened. I don't know.
The way I put it is that the increasingly the battle to get rid of regulations and to lower taxes and to create the side battles has enabled the innovators, the technological what Yanis the Focus calls the techno barons to take over the direction of where our technology is taking us. They're developing the neural implants. They're looking for transhuman consciousness, and meanwhile they're dismantling the universities and the critical and the newspapers and the media that can inform the public about these things. And so it's not being debated in the public square, and they're silencing all of the possible public intellectuals like Noam Chomsky in the past. We don't have a Noam Chomsky today. The closest we come is to oh, I'm forgetting his name, but Tom Hartman maybe, or not forgetting the other guy's name, but we don't have the kind of public intellectuals or the means for getting the news out to the general public that we used to. And we've forgotten that Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. We put in teach to the test, which stifles imagination. We're no longer teaching history or civics. And so increasingly we're putting a generation of students out there that are not prepared to be analytically, have the analytical skills applied to history that are necessary for the citizens of a democracy.
And they don't have a clue about some of the basic provisions of the Constitution, which governs separation of powers, because there's like nobody saying anything every time it's been transgressed, and that's a lot in the last year or so. So what you just said, Arnie, I have to say, boy, is that right and scary.
It is.
I might even say that it's not that they're tossing out some words, but it's not that they don't have a clue, it's that they don't care. I imagine a lot of them know that there is something that's in here, but they don't think that it should be the law of the land, and that they think there is a better law of the land, and that is what they operate under.
Yeah, quick story, Pete. I drove Uber for a while, and I picked up somebody who was at Hopkins, a graduate student in the new technology, AI, advanced AI and robotics. And I said, do you worry at all about the possible negative consequences for humanity? And he said, Arnie, I can't. This is where my talent lies. This is where my future lies. I can't be concerned with the possible dysfunctions of what I'm doing. If I want a life, this is where my future lies.
That's really well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like just relying on fighting and competition is somehow going to solve problems. Getting on top, and it's going to just dissipate all the atrocities of human beings. Well, that's completely naive. We should have learned better from our own history. I mean, we have documented history here. The Civil Rights Act, right, of '64 didn't appear because everyone was already kind and fair and playing fairly. Okay, it appeared because a certain group of citizens were refused jobs and promotions and even entry into buildings. Okay, it appeared because some power brokers used rules that looked neutral, but cut people out at every doorway. If the country had been honest about evil, that law would not even have been a necessity, right? So I mean, the second group of people that I just briefly mentioned that sees the world, very differently as evil always being persistent, that it's hidden, is absolutely necessary without participating in it.
Yeah, it makes me think of, so when the whole Cambridge Analytica thing happened, which the quick background on that, just so everybody, at least what I know or how I interpret it. So Cambridge Analytica got a special deal with Facebook to record how people responded to various different ads, which they then used to redirect. So if they found that people were very much interested in this type of ad, and they would just show something regardless of true or false, to then find out whether or not people were interested in it. And then whichever one's got the most, use Arnie's analogy from before, the most pupil dilation, whichever got the most responses and the most likes and, or clicks and interest, then they just flooded that to a whole bunch of people in certain bloating blocks, and pushed the votes in a particular way, irrespective of right or truthfulness or non-truthfulness. And because they knew that the speed at which you could prosecute that was longer than the election cycle. And for me, the sort of waking up point with some of that stuff is some of the techniques that I saw them using in this stuff, and then I learned later were specifically to use, like Jared, Trump's son-in-law.
Jared Kushner.
Yeah, was in reports talking about, I was spending a lot of time in the lean startup community, and he was talking about, I went and I learned about all these lean startup things, and I worked with Cambridge Analytica, and we put together this, and like he's tying it back together, and I was like, oh crap, like this is all the stuff that I teach, and I wonder how many people are taking the things that I am teaching and using it in immoral ways, or using it in manipulative ways. And sort of waking up to some of those things. There's certain techniques that I know that I will never teach ever again, because I don't know who I'm teaching it to. And I have to wait and see if I find certain people that are already showing that they have a moral conscience and how they want to apply things. And then I will share certain things that I know, but I will not share it openly in those contexts. Not that Cambridge Analytica came to any of my classes, but it's, just because there's a lot of that stuff of like getting the knowledge out there, and people are like, let's find out. So like Kahneman, and Tversky published their news and all that kind of stuff. And so then therefore now people have used that, not in the way they intended, but they have specifically been targeting how can we pattern match and get people to believe things that is not in their best interests, because we now know how the brain works. And that gets into that, I don't know.
This is so depressing. I want to get into the tortures.
Let's get something uplifting now. Let's talk about torture.
Public intellectual who talks at the
Public intellectuals such as Noam Chomsky.
Arnie's doing some research on the side. All right. So do we want to get into that? So like a couple of these were together, the Skull and Crossbones and Torture. It's two separate chapters, but it kind of got to a bunch of the same things of, they did torture, but the intent of the torture was to minimize their need to torture, so that most of the time, majority of the time, people would just give in and not push back. And Matt, I'll kick this one off a little bit, which is I have a friend who was working in in one of the government agencies, and talking about when the Doge folks came through and made a picture, and they forced everybody to come into work. And the way they found out whether or not they had been doged or eliminated or their positions eliminated is they scanned their badge on the way in, and if it didn't go green, then they walked up with their stuff, handed it in front of everybody in this long line, and made this show out of the fact that this person was, unnecessary and therefore a waste to society, marched them out of the building, with security officers. And she was like talking about it. She's like watching this process, like these people crying, finding out in a very public way. And then these Doge people who were hanging out in the lobby and laughing and pointing, and like the point was torture. The point was to make these people humiliated, the people that they felt, did not deserve to be there. And there was just like that to me, like I watch these sorts of things, and like that's a lot of the same mindset. is public humiliation with the intention of making a lesson of don't resist us. Like, you better just, like, don't even bother trying to push back against us, because look what we can do to them. And if we can do it to them, we can do even worse to you. And, like, now it's on the pirate side of things. So while they invented democracy, they also invented that. And it's not rational, but it's something we also have to deal with.
It was certainly creative. Ooh.
I'll just throw in, the guy I was thinking of is Jeffrey Sachs, S-A-C-H-S, economics professor at Columbia.
I've heard it.
So,
But I also think from the fact that the pirates did engage in torture at times, they also did it just to make sure they had the reputation of being able to do that, right? Because they didn't always engage in that activity. It was their reputation just preceded them, and it could oftentimes prevent them from having to engage in barbaric acts just by the sheer fact that they had done it previously.
yep. Yep.
It doesn't seem to work anymore.
That is true. I would agree with you.
Well, I think it's one of the things that the pirate culture itself sort of laid out. You know, it was the barbarity of the merchant captains that led to piracy. And then it was the barbarity of piracy that eventually led to the collapse of that whole culture and that whole way of life. You know, you do that enough times to enough people, and then eventually they need to band together and make sure that you never do that to anybody else again. And so each time you get into this space of ruling by the carelessness and just push it too far, you know, people will put up with a bunch, but then inevitably they push it too far and it creates a backlash. We had the same thing against the robber barons, and we've gone through this cycle a couple times. You know, King George led to the revolution, robber barons led to I'm sort of blanking on the phrase of it now, but like all the things that we think of right now, that we used to have protections, we used to have regulations, we used to have all these things that were taken away. All those things came after the robber barons. So after there were, you know, these huge people that, you know, ran most of the United States, and we had, you know,
Progressive reforms, are you thinking of?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, progressive reforms. You know, we put in checks and balances, and we added a bunch of other different systems to the point that we didn't have to worry about that kind of thing anymore. And we had checks on monopolies, and we had a whole bunch of other things in reaction to this. And then since then, there's been a dismantling of those, of like, look, everything's fine. We don't need those things anymore. And as soon as you dismantle all of those things, all of these bad practices come back.
I would ask a question at this point. This is something I'm coming to believe, but I need to be challenged. When Hayek, Milton Friedman, and the others who see the individual as the basis of reality and greed as being good is the way for progress, and they then say that justice cannot work because it simply disrupts the rational system. And given the fact that the founders put in checks and balances to create a system of justice, does that mean that all of the neoliberals, lawyers, and members of the Supreme Court and people following the neoliberal theory are basically anti-constitutionalists?
And for the clarity there, neoliberal not being liberals as in democratics. The neoliberal being more like the philosophy of libertarians.
Just don't know.
So, Brandon, I saw before Arnie jumped in and
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer Arnie's question. I don't know if I can answer Arnie's question. I forget what I was going to say. Hold on, I'll think about it and I'll jump back in.
Okay.
Sorry, Brandon.
You know,
Always fun. Always like to hear what you have to say, Arnie. It's all good.
yeah, everyone keeps talking about Milton Friedman. You know, um, Friedman was a sharp mind, right? With a pretty narrow frame, though. He treated um, markets as the main arena of freedom, and reduced most human problems to questions of incentives and price signals, right? I mean, his famous line that what is that, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits, distilled a sort of a world view, like as if everyone just chases their own gain inside formal rules. The invisible hand will somehow magically sort things out. That sounds clean. Okay, it is also dangerously incomplete. Um, Milton Friedman's framework tends to shrink justice into something like property rights plus contracts. Okay, so structural racism, imperialism, uh, labor exploitation, propaganda, and manufactured consent become side issues if they're acknowledged at all. Okay, I mean, power imbalances, inherited privilege, global consequences of American capital are treated as background noise, to the real story of individuals making choices in a marketplace. I think so many people are fooled and misled by his ideologies.
Carter, I couldn't agree with you more. Let me throw in a little historical background. Uh, I could go back farther, but I'll start in the 15th century with a couple of papal bulls. The doctrine of discovery and Dum Diversus, which sort of said that if heathens, if non-Christians, and people who are not working the land are along the path of discovery of the discoverers of that age, then the land and the people was up for grab and could be claimed. John Locke's theory of property then put that into our Constitution and into Western philosophy, saying that if the land is not being worked, the land is open for somebody to use as it could be, and that's the background for part of the background for Laffer, Friedman, and the other guy, whoever. So this ideology that's part of our collective unconscious, as Young or Joseph Campbell would say, are deeply ingrained in our history.
I agree.
Yeah. I think in some of a reaction to what you were saying earlier, Arnie, and to what you were saying, Sumner, Carter, I think one of the things that we've learned is that the checks and balances are necessary. And I've read some stuff about Milton Friedman and Darwin that caught my attention. I'll start with Darwin, which was people were going to Darwin and saying, well, what does this have to do, like, isn't this antithetical to God and religion and morality and all the stuff that, is happening, your survival of the fittest and all this kind of stuff. And Darwin's response in those articles or in those reports was that he's like, oh, like, that still exists. Like, God, religion, morality is an important thing. I'm just saying there's this other thing that we need to pay attention to. And because he chose to never talk about one and only talk about the other, a bunch of people who were his followers took over to thinking about just that thing as that religion is a thing of the past and doesn't have anything to do with it. Morality has nothing to do with it. And Darwin, there's some cases where Darwin's like saying, like, that's never what I was saying. Like, I'm not saying that the world is immoral and, But he chose to not talk about stuff because he assumed that was always going to be part of the discussion. And I read an article of Milton Friedman where he did the same thing, where somebody was asking him about morality and all this kind of stuff, and he's like, morality is necessary in business. That's a given. Like that's already been established. That's never going away. I'm saying that on top of that, so if you have a moral functioning company, then personal interest will help to drive you in the direction that you do. But because he chose to never ever talk about that other half of that piece and just never bring morality because he assumed that companies would be moral, and so therefore he only wanted to talk about the other half, and now everybody who follows him only talks about the half, and they never talk about the morality that led into it. So, once for me, I get into that point of like, it's important to talk about the assumptions and to just go ahead and say them and restate the assumptions. It's part of the reason why I'm defining things on this video as we go along, just so that we have the context for it. Because when we lose the context of when the things were said, and the only thing we have left are the things that were said, we misinterpret them because we don't understand the culture that they were part of when they were first put together.
Nice.
Shall we move into, there was forced labor and volunteer labor. And I didn't get to go back through this section. And I didn't remember it as much, so I'm not going to have as many things to say in here. But they were talking about the conscription, so that after a certain point, if they needed to fill their ranks as they would take over a ship, they would take some of the sailors who had been previously operating under these, torturous captains, conscript them. They did not want to do it, but then after they spent some time on the ship, they were like, "Whoa, this is a much better thing than what I was part of. I'm kind of glad you guys did this." Versus what was happening on a lot of the other ones, which was that they were conscripting in the opposite direction. They were taking free people and then turning them into literal slaves who then had no power or decision on anything, and were just worked. And so imbalance, and yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm gonna stop right there. Brandon, you came up.
Yeah, no, I went through it again too because I was like looking for the terms they used. And I think it's the cost benefit analysis. They use the terms concentrated costs and versus the dispersed benefits. So I think they made the point, if I understood it correctly, that if you took on too much risk with forced labor, the amount of benefits you were getting from them weren't worth the risk, because everybody shared the worst cost if the ship went down, or if they got caught, right? Everybody shared like the worst of that, but the benefits were so spread out and even it wasn't worth it, kind of. So that was, yeah, I thought he described that well, using those two terms.
Brandon, I think that's an important point. That when you have a society with growing inequality and less benefits for more and more people, there's no reason for them to want to become part of that society. And to the extent that we other people and diminish their resources to the point where life becomes too hard to be committed, then they're going to turn to alternative lifestyles like drugs and crime. And to attempt to then control that by law and by force is totally irrational.
Was it?
Totally agree.
Yeah. Was it you and I, Arnie, or that was some? No. It was another group. I ended up coming across this guy who had gone in and did a study of the gangs in Central America. And he had actually gotten to go and embed with a bunch of the gangs and document a lot of the things that were happening. And it was a similar kind of situation that he's kind of pulled forward, which is that in those areas, the government was so corrupt that the people in the towns ended up having to take over. And it became this sort of lawless thing. And so in order to create some measure of safety, the gangs policed the neighborhoods, and it started as policing the neighborhoods. But then if somebody didn't like the fact that, like, who made you boss, then it turned into violence, and then eventually it got imbalanced, and then there was another imbalance, and now the gang was being just as bad as the government had been previously. And that for me, it goes back to the absence of the checks and balances. There are certain people that this guy was documenting in these places with the different gangs that they're like, this is a better life than life used to be. Like, I don't mind having the gang here because they keep the streets empty. I don't get attacked. I don't get robbed. I mean, yes, I have to pay them, but in exchange for paying them instead of paying taxes, they keep a safe environment here. You just don't get on the wrong side of them.
Another piece of that, Pete, is that back 30, 40 years ago, when the newspaper and the analysts were talking about the gang violence that was related to drugs, the assumption among the analysts and then among the people was the taking of drugs creates violence. And what researchers like Henry Brownstein found out in researching the situation in New York is the reason why there was so much violence among the gangs is because there would be disputes over a bill not paid or the quality of the drugs, and there was no way to have the courts regulate those disputes, so they took it out in terms of guns and violence. So the whole public assumption about the nature of drug dealing violence, drug taking violence, it was a lack of courts and enforcement among the gangs themselves that was creating the violence. The diagnosis becomes critically important, and we don't have enough of it.
Yeah. You got to know where it's coming from. Yeah, one of the things that kind of says to me is how they talked about that inside of the pirate. Like, there's always a boundary that if you're in the group, it creates a better life, and you're outside of the group, it creates a much worse life. And so in this context, they talked about with the pirate crews inside of there, you couldn't have battles, you couldn't have the back and forth. So if anything, any kind of violence struck out inside of a pirate crew that was more than a certain thing, the consequence was marooning or death, and that kept it in check. And so inside, so they would be ruthless to people outside their group, but inside their group, like, no fights. Like, we're going to work it out, we're going to talk it out, we're going to figure this out, we're going to do votes, we're going to have debates, we're going to, like, they worked out all of these things to avoid violence inside of their group. And that, to me, I think is indicative of the direction that things can go. We just need to keep making that circle wider. That if inside the group, and say inside the United States, but even going all the way inside the planet, that if instead of using violence to solve the problems, we instead listen to each other, we do problem solvings, we pay attention to the fact that one person's solution is causing somebody else's problem and vice versa, and we look at solving as many people's problems as possible, we end up with a better thing that doesn't require violence for enforcement. And I felt like that drove a lot of the pirate democracy, was solving that for a small group. But they just didn't do that beyond that group.
Well said.
I like the fact that they were able to solve the free rider problem, because if everyone is supposedly working towards the same goal and there are people that are just getting the benefits it builds up resentment and definitely can lead to, internal violence. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I just never thought people could think of these things back, in the 1600s or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are good points. So, and I think you both might have been talking about this. So, Pete, were you saying that were you talking about how to handle like punishment on board a ship was less violent than punishment for others? Was that the point you were making there? Like the marooning wasn't necessarily like a direct violence. Like if they marooned some of their own members, if they had to maroon them, that was a less harsh of a punishment.
Actually, that was considered.
Okay.
I just read that, or I just got to that
Okay.
part today. That was considered actually a worse fate than killing the person. Because if you killed the person, it was over. If you marooned them on an island with very little water and drink and nobody to comment, they would starve to death. And they were given a gun, to basically say, because it would have been better to shoot yourself and die. We're not going to shoot you, but we're going to make your life such a living hell that you're going to want to shoot yourself. So they considered marooning as a greater punishment, a worse punishment than killing the person. I was more getting to the statement they were making, which is that it became part of the contract that there was no, like, you do not get in fights. If it gets above a certain thing, if you strike, if you injure some, if you pull out a gun, if you do that's it. There's no second chances. You're off the boat into a marooning, or we're going to kill you. And so they policed themselves on board, and so it was like, hey, hold on, no, you're getting too worked up. You don't want to do that, or else you're going to be off the boat. There's going to be a consequence for it. And like the no loud partying or languages, or if you're going to do that at night, you had to go up to the deck. You couldn't be on the lower level so people could sleep. Like all of these different rules, and it was just like, you don't break these rules. And through that process on board the ship, it was very nonviolent.
I would have preferred to be a pirate back in those days, for sure. I mean,
yeah. Especially given what they described on the merchant ships. I would not have wanted.
Are you saying if you had to be at sea in some scenario, you'd rather be a pirate?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe if there was a better option on land, I don't know. Which I also found interesting. I don't think they touched on this really, but again, not to get off topic here, but it seems to me that all the treasure they're getting in these plunders are not good on the open sea, right? They have to have a safe haven on land to be able to spend it, to have value. So that was, I think they did talk about some of their safe havens, maybe the Bahamas, Madagascar, I don't remember. But I think that's an interesting part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a whole sort of, black market background, that you would go to these places and sell it. I did some research behind Black Sails, the TV series. And they were talking, like, they did a lot of really good research to lead up to it. So most of the characters on there were direct depictions, of folks that actually existed, pulled from records of things that happened, including the people on the various different pilot islands that were the merchants. Because the only way that you could recoup your gains was you had to go to these islands and you had to sell it to somebody who had connections in the old world, who would then find another way to get it back to the old world and sell it for legitimate dollars, and then bring the legitimate dollars back around. And that was one of the ways that they took down the pirate colonies, is they stopped fighting the ships and they started attacking the people who were buying the stuff off of the ships. And when they destroyed the businesses that were buying the stolen goods, so there was nowhere else to sell, the pirate bands dispersed because there was no longer profit in it.
They cut the supply chain, or I guess the other side of it.
Yeah. And here the pirates could have gotten away with it if they hadn't been so barbarous to everybody else.
To create volunteer labor and to attract it more on a continuous basis, we have to kind of think about foreign policy, right? Someone mentioned Noam Chomsky. He lines up in spirit with what pushed. Do you guys remember Eisenhower running against Taft, right? Eisenhower feared isolationism because he had, right after World War II, he had seen the cost of fascism, right? Just like Chomsky fears imperial arrogance and corporate capture because he has seen the cost of American power when it's used to crush, self determination abroad. I think both Chomsky and Eisenhower both see that moral responsibility does not stop at just the national borders. The difference, I think, is Chomsky refuses to kind of romanticize that American role. He's a truth teller. He reminds us that universal rights are not just about defending Europe from Stalin, right? They're also about not supporting coups and client regimes that torture and murder their fucking own populations when those regimes serve American business interests, right? I think Chomsky keeps dragging the conversation back to the workers, even to the peasants and the ordinary people whose lives are treated as expendable. And I think that would really initiate and promote and attract volunteer labor.
Well said.
Reminds me of a thing. I'm trying to come up with the what was the name of that country? Oh, Indonesia. Have you guys heard about the coup that happened in Indonesia?
Just recently?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
There was a Gen Z people's uprising against the government in Indonesia, and several of the people were, or the Gen Z, the younger folks were flying the flag of. There's this TV series called One Piece, and one of the characters has this Jolly Roger, because in One Piece they're all pirates, but there's this one like moral pirate. And so he goes through this whole process, and he wants to be the king of the pirates, not for any personal gain, but to bring as much freedom as possible to the world. And it's become this kind of a symbol. So there was another election of corrupt people. They did not honor the votes, and their population just had enough, and they ran in and they just took over the state buildings and just reversed the whole thing. They ended up running their own elections on Discord, and they went through, ran their own people's elections, fairly balanced. I think they even used like the blockchain to record the votes of all of the remaining candidates, who were still on there, and they installed the person that won the vote on Discord in charge of the government and removed everybody else out. But like they had this story of going even further of, so there was violence. They did set fire to a bunch of different things. But there were these stories that they were going back. They would only set fire to something that was empty. And there was a couple cases where the elected officials, the corrupt officials, had just abandoned their families. And so these kids went in, collected the families, ushered them out, made sure they were safe and they were protected, and then they burned the building. And they just took care of everybody. And there was inevitably a bunch of looting. So these kids went back around. They looked at the recordings of all the things that were happening. They found the people who were doing the looting. They showed up at their door and they said, "You're putting all this stuff back. We didn't do this so that you could steal from our local businesses, because the businesses are Indonesian as well." And they made all of the looters take all of their loot back to the businesses and restock the stores. And they just they did a moral uprising to overthrow a corrupt government, and they were inspired by a TV show.
Wow. That's fascinating.
This was just in the past month or so, or
Yeah, let me see what this was. September this year.
wow. Okay.
I'm definitely going to read about it now.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah, there's not been a lot of talk about this. it caught my eye because I've been fascinated by this show, One Piece. And in this, so it's a show about a variety of different pirates. It started off as a comic book or a Japanese manga, and then it's been a running 1,000-episode TV series across many decades, and people just love this thing. And I was like, what is it that people love about this? And because it's centered around pirates, but I think it goes into a lot of what we're talking about is the whole pirate culture is built around resisting tyranny of the government. But then it also causes its own immorality. And then the main character of this series is fighting both against the government and against immorality and bringing a moral piracy that helps the people in each location that he goes through and brings freedom and a self-governance that had never existed before. And I'm like, I think that's the inspiring thing inside of this, is that nothing is set in stone. Nothing is purely good and evil, in that everything can be corrupted and everything can be good. And we have to watch, and that's what the checks and balances are for.
Is that show the Our Flag is Death show?
No, different show.
What's the name of the one then?
This one is called One Piece.
One Piece, like P-E-A-C-E?
Piece.
Okay. HBO or what?
It's a cartoon series that was on Netflix, and they just did a season of live action in Netflix.
Okay, thanks.
And it got renewed for another season, but they haven't published that out yet.
Okay.
I guess I end up watching a lot of pirate stuff. All right. Shall we talk about racial diversity? Versus, as I thought this is probably the better system or name for it, it's the systemic racism. You know, what we had certainly established in the islands at that point was the determination that Black people, Africans in particular, but also, the folks are going to be the slaves in America. And they spent a lot of time sort of building up this thing that the poor white indentured servants, because originally when you came over to the United States, you had a mixture of indentured people who were basically treated as slaves, but of various different things, and they started getting together. So they came in and said, oh, but look, they're different than you. They look different than you. This is how you can tell that this is a person that should be a slave, and you're one of us. And created start of a systematic system of racism in order to reduce the amount of rebellion. And that carried over into the ships, and that carried over into the merchant. And so there were some people that if you were of African descent, you were going to become a slave. And if you were of English descent, you were not. And then they also got into something so if you were Spanish, life was going to be hard for you, unless you were in the Spanish colonies, in which case if you were British, life was going to be hard for you. But they really drew those lines very clearly, and the pirates didn't care where you came from. If you're oppressed and you don't want to be anymore, join us.
There was some gray area there, though, based on what we read. Yeah, there was some gray area.
I've also started watching the Jason Momoa Chief of War about Hawaii. And there's a bunch of pirate ships that came into Hawaii that kind of kicked off a bunch of things that were happening there. They got in, some of the ships were very racist, and some of them were very equal. Some ships didn't care, and some ships cared a lot. It wasn't a given in any place, but there was more of an opportunity, I think, on the water.
It wasn't perfect, but it sounds like even though it's not perfect, they had enough incentives there to head it, push it in a better direction. in some places, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear in different ways and for different things that women were also given. It was easier to have a place of prominence as a woman in pirate culture. Still not equal. But there are several places, especially merchants, in the merchant places on land, where women dominated and ran very strong businesses, and all of the pirates respected their authority in ways that they would never be able to in established colonial society.
Yeah. I would have signed up, I'm telling you.
Philip is in.
You look good with a parrot on your shoulder.
Okay, thank you. I guess if we were going to move to the subject of the individual self-interest versus moral values, I was going to ask, what's the major question that arises in anybody's mind after reading this about individual self-interest versus moral? We talked about it a little bit, but I'm thinking now that we've reviewed some of the other details about it. I still don't believe that it's one has to cancel out the other. I think that there is a degree to which people are motivated to help themselves and those they love. But I also still see acts of kindness. People are capable of kindness, or they're capable of decency at least. And I feel like that's also undergirding the economic system. I mean, yeah, selfishness might motivate, but there's still some balance that, just, I think there's an innate kind of empathy in humans. I think it's innate. It certainly gets raised or reared out of you in time. You certainly can lose a lot of it depending on how the world is for you, how society is structured and affecting you. But I still feel that the degree to which economists, especially the rational choice people, feel that it's only greed, it's only self-interest that motivates. I think that's, I just think it's not 100%. It's not, I think it's false. It's not only individual self-interest. I'm sorry, it just isn't. We can point to too many instances in which it's an exception. But I loved I love the way that this book made me think about those questions a lot more. And I feel like I've come away with something I'm very interested in again, and will definitely, be thinking about in the coming months, instead of, and hoping I could find the way to see more of that there's a moral foundation at some level. It's not consistent, but I just feel everything is not governed by individual self-interest all the time.
Mm-hmm.
One of my professors, when I studied at the University of Leiden, Bart Landhair, who is a sociologist of knowledge and head librarian at the Peace Palace in The Hague, used to say that through the course of history, we've evolved from tribes to clans to nations to civilizations. And that the next thing we have to do is evolve beyond civilizations. My words now, not his, because I don't remember the quote, but we have to evolve beyond civilizations to seeing ourselves as one species enjoying this one beautiful planet. And that while we need individual motivation in order to recognize what Madison said, that we all have differential ambition and differential talent, that we have to exercise those within a collaborative problem-solving recognition that we we all need to survive together, and we'll all do better if we have an equitable balance. And the neoliberals and the rational choice people have destroyed that idea.
They sure have.
Yeah, it matches a system that I love, that I find is very hopeful. It was developed by a guy named Claire Graves back in the 40s and the 50s. Goes under another name called spiral dynamics. But the way I'd like to describe it is that people have a particular sphere of awareness, and as they grow through life, they get to a certain understanding. So like when you're babies, like you only know yourself and your own body, and then you become aware of mom. Then you become aware that you're part of a family, and then you become aware that you're, part of a clan, people who share a blood relationship. And then you realize that there's other people that are like you, but they're not blood related. And as you come to these different realizations, and you can imagine and understand and connect with more and more people who are different than you and further away from you, that you develop new models and ways of thinking that are more tolerant, that start to bring us together, that are ways that operate in a more moral or a redefining morality on a larger and larger scale. That the world is going to head in that direction. But people are at different stages along that. And if anybody gets stopped or stuck, where they're in an environment or somebody is keeping them stuck, wherein they never are allowed to meet other people that are not part of their family, or they're not allowed to meet other people who don't live the same way that they do, they will never be aware that it's okay to live in a different way, and it doesn't affect your ability to live in the way that you want to live. And it's that awareness which can lead us to a greater morality. But you can't just take somebody and plop them into a whole new situation because it's too far of a leap, and they don't have the steps in between that allow them to get there. So the whole philosophy is, how can you take people to one more step of awareness, not all the way to a place that they can't even fathom yet.
Nice.
Yeah. That's well said. And along those lines, does that mean you need to be careful on trying to push people too far or too much at once?
Yeah, that was one of his main theories, is that a lot of the pushback and the resistance is not that they wouldn't be better off in that other environment. It was just so foreign to them that they just couldn't make the leap. And so contrasted with other places where they get to move gradually, there's much better sort of outcomes. Dave McRaney captured this really well in his book, How Minds Change, I think is the title of it. And he talks about talking and spending some time with people in what's the name? There's like a cult. There's people that go around and hold up signs and chant about the
Hare Krishna.
No, it's the Westboro Baptist Church.
Okay.
And so he would spend some time with some people who were part of this, and they just grew up in this, and all of the people who were inside of this live in one particular neighborhood around this Westboro, and they've driven out anybody that doesn't attend that church, and nobody from the outside ever comes in. And so they go with this understanding of only their world, and that's why they're able to go out with such vitriol and say, you are evil and you are doing these things and you can do these protests. But sometimes some of those people would break off in the portion of a protest and be separated from the rest of the folks, wherein they would start to get into a dialogue with one of the people on the other side, and those people would start to understand the other point of view. But as soon as their group came and fetched them, they were taken away from exposure to other ideas besides what they had grown up with, and they went back to that way of thinking. But the people who had these, like none of the people who were raised in that church wanted to get out of that church, except for the ones who ended up at protests and ended up talking with somebody else and found out that that person wasn't that different and was from themselves and wasn't that different, or was very different than what they had taught that person was going to be like. And then those people were like, I want to know more. And then they started seeking out like another level of knowledge until they finally broke away and separated out from the church. But it took that exposure to something that wasn't like them for them to see that the world was not everything that they had been taught.
That's one of the things I'm looking at in the manuscript that I'm working on. It's, for example, how do we go from no Christians to half of the Roman population by the end of the 2nd century? How did Constantine grow the Catholic Church so fast? How did Mehdi create the Ottoman Empire that spread across the world in 150 years? So I'm looking at where that has occurred as we move from local to increasingly cosmopolitan to civilization, as a way to see how we can get beyond civilization to a one world point of view. And we were moving in that direction for a while, and now we've reverted back away from it very quickly.
Yeah. I'm curious in the context of this theory, that I think instead of giving people more exposure progressively, there's a bunch of people who are just like, you are now part of a one worldview with no steps in between. And those people freaked out and resisted and started pushing back, and creating their own coalition. To say like, you one world people are crazy, and you're the reason that the world is falling apart. They just don't talk the same language, so it doesn't. Even though they talk English, they do not say the same things when they speak. And
I always feel like, I don't know, I feel like, I know this is a very oversimplified metaphor, but I feel like we all have to believe we're on the same train, and that gorge and cliff in the distance is going to impact everybody on the train. We all have to figure out a way to get off. I know that's oversimplification, but I don't know. That's where my mind is.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
It's crisp. What's next, Peter?
that's a good question. We can probably come around at this point to talking about what do we want to read next. And we also talk about availability. So we're coming up to December. So there will be holidays and a variety of other different things.
Did we already decide last time that we were going to read the suggestion, Arnie's suggestion?
Oh, what was it?
I thought there were 2 books we were deciding between, and we were just going to...
We went with the shorter one this time.
Yeah, we went with the shorter one this time. And I think Arnie suggested, and most people agreed, that for the bigger book, we would have to break it up. Maybe.
Yeah.
What was the name of that one again, Arnie?
Was that the Applebaum book? Or the Heather Cox Richardson book?
I don't think it was either one of them. What was her name? It was a female author who was on.
Was it Anne Applebaum?
Probably, yeah. Very likely.
What's the title?
That's not the name that's coming ringing bell for me, but I don't have it written down here, fortunately.
Oh, do you? Good.
Oh, Jill Lepore is the name.
Oh,
Yes, it was Jill Lepore.
Yes.
We the People.
She's wonderful.
We the People.
We the People. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Again, I'm not declaring that it has to be that. For some reason, I was thinking those are the 2 books, and we just decided to read The Invisible Hook for this one.
If you want to get to know her quickly, just Google her from videos by Jill Lepore. She's ever present. She's a professor. She's a lawyer and a historian that teaches at Harvard, and she's very clear-sighted and very deeply knowledgeable.
It's funny. I think right after, within a week after you mentioned her, or on the last month's club, she was on a podcast that I listened to.
What did you think?
Yeah, she's very interesting. Good interview. Yeah.
All right. So we want to do that next.
Sounds good to me.
How many pages? First 3 chapters?
How many chapters is it?
Let me look it up real quick.
She wasn't on the Constitution that's done by Roman Mars, was she? Was that the podcast you were listening to?
No, that's not the one I heard.
Okay.
Let me see if I can.
Because I listened to 99% Invisible by Roman Mars, and he's doing one on the Constitution now. Sort of a special series, and he had a speaker.
720 pages.
I imagine a lot of those are references.
I'm sure, but what do you think? 90 pages? First 90? Let's see if I can do chapters.
Or else we'll never get through it.
Do you think Batman would vote for Donald Trump?
Yeah, so that's what I heard her on. She was on Hassan Minaj podcast.
Okay.
Chapters and reports with the people.
I see a few other. So she was on the Daily Show as well. Yeah, she's going to a bunch of different places. But I don't see a chapter breakdown. It's in the chapter titles.
On the 250th anniversary of Americans' founding, a landmark history of the U.S. Constitution for a troubling new era. The U.S. Constitution is among the oldest constitutions in the world and one of the most difficult to attend.
I think maybe it's because you misspelled chapters there.
Oh, did I?
Oh
yeah, look at that. It was behind the Zoom window, so I couldn't actually see it. I thought I typed it right, but I was wrong.
Although it might have given you the same results actually.
Might have. All right.
Did it say 13 chapters? I think I saw 13
chapters. So I guess we're kind of looking at, approximately 6 chapters, 6 to 7 chapters for each session. All right. And then as far as, so do we want to take December off and spend some time reading and come back in January? Or do we want to do half of it in December and half of it in January?
Yeah, I mean, I know everybody's on different schedules. January would probably work better for me. I'll be doing some traveling in December
I think
for work and personal.
the same reason.
Yeah.
I think January is good.
Okay.
That works for me too. I'm not.
Merry
I'm
Christmas
traveling
and
this
Happy
week.
New Year.
But
So we usually go the second or third. We're not going to do New Year's Day. So the second or third Thursday. For me, I actually have something. I'm not sure if this is set, but I think I have something on the 8th.
do you want to do the
15th?
15th?
How about, is that the second Thursday?
8th is the second Thursday, and the 15th is the third Thursday.
I have a meeting that I have to chair on the 15th, once a month on the third Thursdays. So
Did someone say the 8th wasn't good?
I have to check in on, so I have something on my calendar, but it may not actually happen. So let me double check and see if that's actually going to happen or not. So shall we say, so it sounds like the 8th is what's good for most people. Was there anybody else that could not do the 8th?
Works for me.
All right. Let's go ahead and put it down for the 8th. Because that thing actually on my calendar starts at like 8, so it would start about now. So I could still attend most of the book club and then switch over if I have to.
Okay.
So that works. All right, so let's do. Next one will be January 8th. So if you're going on travel, take the book with you. Get it all read up. You got 2 months to read. And we'll come back together on January 8th.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
happy
Sounds
holiday.
Appreciate it listening to all
You
you.
too.
Yep. Have a nice night.
Have a good evening.
A good discussion. Thank you.